Thanks, Claudia, for setting everything up. Jeff, for inviting us every year. I don't know why, but thank you. Usually, anybody else wants water?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. It's amazing to see, Yale Innovation Summit. I don't remember the first year. When was it, Cindy, that we...
2019?
No, but I think 2018, 19 is when I first joined. I don't remember. It's like huge now. It's amazing. So thanks to all of you, Josh, Yale Ventures, Cindy, Claudia, everybody for doing this. I'm BG. Last night around 1 a.m. when we were eating pizza at Test, and the guy actually recognized me from 30 years ago. We were all confused about whether we were doing a panel today, but we are. And we were even more confused about what this panel is about. Turns out Claudia called and told us that it's about innovation at scale. Given that most of us don't know what that is, we'll figure that out during the program. Is that good? Anyway, I'm BG, Yale CS 95 PhD. I'm a partner in a San Francisco firm called 8VC. We do a bunch of incubations, but majorly investments. We manage about $7 billion. I lead the enterprise software track, so very heavy focus on early phase investments in AI, data, cloud, and B2B SaaS. And spent about 20 years in industry before that. Was fairly early at Oracle, Yahoo, LinkedIn, mostly in product and engineering. So did see some innovation at work. Why don't we let our panelists introduce themselves, and then I'll jump right into some questions. Nami?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us today. I'm Nami Vedre. I am a Yale PhD electrical engineering from 2017. It's great to be back at the 10th anniversary of the summit, because I was telling Jeff yesterday, I was here when we first organized the first summit 10 years ago, and we barely could fill one conference room up on Science Hill. To see that it has taken on a life of its own, has so many tracks, and has in so many ways reached escape velocity is very gratifying, and it's great to be back here for this edition. My background, even though I'm an engineer by training, I talk about how I knew coming into Yale that I wanted to do something else, and Yale Entrepreneurial Institute was what it was called back then, and that's where I found my home, working with entrepreneurs, working on how do we get innovation out of the labs, from the bench to bedside, whatever you want to call it. That was what I fell in love with, and over the last 10 years, that's what I've chased. At Georgia Tech, built startup programs, joined a venture capital fund that was completely backed by large corporations, so have a lot of enterprise scale, much like what BG suggested, and now lead enterprise sales for a startup that I invested in when I was at Engage. So sort of life's come full circle, and it's great to be here on this panel, and looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, I'm Linda Rotenberg, and when I was at Yale Law School in the early 90s, though I also took a lot of courses at SOM, I was the only person in my class who didn't have the next 2 or 3 jobs lined up, and my professors took pity on me and sent me down to Latin America on some projects, and everyone was talking about microcredit, and I said, wait a minute, we need Microsoft to come out of here. And there wasn't even a word in Spanish or Portuguese at that time for entrepreneurs. So I had this crazy idea, it was called Chica Loca, to say, no, there are entrepreneurs at scale, we're gonna talk about at scale in Latin America, and scroll to, now 27 years later, Endeavor operates in 40 countries. We have a team of 600. We have helped to popularize the words for entrepreneur and entrepreneurship in Spanish, Portuguese, Bahasa Indonesian, Arabic, Turkish, and other languages. We are a hybrid organization, so we have a fund with currently 500 million assets under management, and then we have the nonprofit that's working on ecosystem development. And in the fund, we have now $57 billion plus companies. So we are now the outside the US, China, and India, the largest and number one investor in unicorns. Although unlike Tiger and SoftBank, we actually come in Series A, so we're not minting the unicorns. We just have the upside, and then we'll talk about ecosystem impact later.
Well, that's super cool. Hey everybody, Scott Wagner. I currently am the CEO of a company called GoodRx. Before that, I ran GoDaddy, and I call myself a reformed private equity guy. So I was, in the investing world for a while, and then really just wanted to grab something and lead and build something that people recognize and use, and day in, day out say, "Oh, that's awesome," or if it's not working, give me constructive feedback, because feedback's a gift, and then we move it forward. So. I was an undergrad here in the early 90s. Love this place, and it's great to be back. Hey, just could I ask one thing before handing it off to my friend Shen here? Show of hands, how many people in the audience call yourself operators, entrepreneurs, just to gauge the audience a little bit? Awesome. Thank you. How many investors? Great. And then everybody, for purposes of this, there's everybody else. So, cool. Thank you for that. That helps. Shen?
Hi, I'm Shen. I got a PhD from Yale in 1990s. I left Yale in '96. Back then, really, entrepreneurship wasn't such a big deal. I don't think people cared about it, and so like most people, we went work with some large companies, and I think that's it's appropriate for this session, innovation at scale. May I have to say, over the last 20 plus years, I've had my struggle innovating at scale in these large companies, and so much so that I repeatedly decided to exit and then start my own company. So I've started a few software companies myself, which again exited back to large companies. So it's been sort of a circle back and forth. I'm currently just at the early stages of running my startup called Acorn Labs, and this is the next cycle begins. So I've seen how things happen in large companies, small companies, and I think overall I've certainly learned a lot.
All right, I'll start with Sheng, and then we'll go this way. It's fascinating that Scott is here. Scott, you've spent many years in PE and running large companies. I mean, GoDaddy, GoDRX. Sheng, this is your third company or fourth?
Yeah, fourth.
Sheng is an extremely well-known guy in Bay Area, extremely humble. So, Sheng, before we get to innovation at scale, any thoughts on like the 0 to 1, 1 to 10 phase that you took your companies through? And most of us, including me, we have severe confirmation bias around innovation, mostly being around technology. You worked a lot on deep infrastructure stuff, cloud infrastructure stuff, and I'll get to the application layer also in software. And I'm curious, you want to just make a couple of points around the initial ideas of innovation from the tech side as you were starting and beginning to scale your company versus, say, the go-to-market side and the business side?
No, I'll talk about that. I've always been a technical guy, but to be honest, I think a key part of innovation is in go-to-market. So if you think about, and they're really inseparable, and the earlier you recognize that, the better. And that plays into our main topic, innovation at scale. What do you think you need for innovation? I mean, obviously you need some resources, your own time, or you need money, right? And there was a time only IBMs and AT&Ts can supply that, but now there's capital everywhere. So that become a bit of a commodity. And then you obviously need a product, and so you need to be able to create that. And then you need distribution, and I think that is something that really changed. There was a time when if you're a P&G or you're one of those big companies, they give you distribution. And the startup starting from scratch, especially when you're selling physical goods, it's very difficult to get into market. So a lot of companies, instead get into IP licensing and stuff like that. And but today the online world changed that. I was lucky enough to get into the software industry where distribution is much less of an issue. So because of that, at small scale, really, we could have all the pieces in place as long as you have a product. So everything basically boils down to product. Less technology, more product. So that's why you hear things like product market fit. Whereas in large companies, in fact, what you tend to struggle most is turned out to be distribution, because even though large companies had distribution, but they built these silos so that the product team typically do not get to interface with the go-to-market side. And also when the product is early, when the market is small, the go-to-market side is plainly not interested in going after a mere $1 million opportunity when they can go after a much bigger opportunity. So that's sort of partly what I learned over the years.
Sheng, any anecdotal examples from your time at Cloud or Rancher or Acorn about a technical innovation that you remember versus a go-to-market innovation?
Yeah, all of us remember the cloud, right? So one of the companies I started early on was a company called Cloud.com. So we went out and bought the domain name, and we decided to GoDaddy. We brokered the deal, and then we just started to blatantly wanted to compete against IBM. I mean, back then it was like 15 years ago. Wanted to compete against IBM's back then. IBM, HP, Dell, VMware. It's kind of a no-brainer. Everyone wanted to get into infrastructure cloud, and so we went into it as well. But amazingly, we had a play. So speaking of the product, I think more or less everyone created the same product. VMware, we actually created no better product than VMware at the end of the day. Because we were a 5-person team, we worked very hard, but VMware had a 50-person team. IBM had a 500-person team. Those are a bit hard to beat. We're the gorilla. They are the true force, right? And these were smart people. They had good designers. Their product not only functioned, but it honestly looked better. So those necessarily were hard to beat. But I would say at the end of the day, believe it or not, they lost on distribution. So how could that be the case? So first of all, we made our product open source. None of them did. So open source just at the time, gave us so much more distribution than any proprietary product could have ever competed. So that's one. And second is just the way they distributed. All of these companies decide to extend their existing offerings. So whatever they did, like IBM, the whole point of cloud is they had to sell more of their stuff, their data center. Dell had to sell more of their storage. VMware had to sell more of their hypervisor. So everyone had an ulterior motive, right? Which in some sense really impeded their go-to-market. So at the end of the day, we were really one of the biggest. And the fact that we could compete against those big guys, not really in product, but more in distribution. I mean, that should really give you some idea of what the world is going into. I mean, today, like you can look at examples like OpenAI versus Google, right? Is it obviously they have a great product, but one could argue, they won on the distribution as well. So I think this is really one of my biggest learnings.
Scott, you want to? I want to add something maybe in the second part of this panel, which is about cultural innovation and org innovation. I'm going to get into that also. But you've spent a lot of time at KKR in the PE field, and then you ran a company. I mean, you've done both B2B, B2C, and B2C, right? GoDaddy and now GoodRx. Curious as to your thoughts about when you took these companies over, GoDaddy and GoodRx. Any anecdotal stuff about points about product innovation versus distribution innovation that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, sure. And maybe less innovation, but the insight of what are you awesome at, and what do people need from you? And I always find it fascinating when people are talking about their ideas, how things on PowerPoint feel businessy, they're dry, and now in my advancing age, I can totally tell when somebody knows the problem they're solving and the one they're not. And Sheng used the words product market fit. Real innovation, right, is when people say, wow, that's awesome. Wow, that hit a problem I have. And the advice, whether it's 3 people and you're in a room thinking about what your idea is, to honestly companies of thousands of people, all the magic is when you have a real understanding of what problem or what pain point or what benefit you're trying to do, and bringing that to life. And Linda's probably got a ton of insight around the same topic, but there's a little bit of this is the advice of, boy, just feel and know the problem you're solving, and honestly, the rest of the stuff just
and the
falls.
user and customer you're going after.
That's entirely the point.
Any one comment about, like, and I'm going to get to Linda, Scott, about you operated businesses at much larger scale than I think most of us have on this panel. Anything you had to change around distribution innovation, or anything you want to call out? I mean, you were doing stuff at fairly big
so my I agree with everything said of, it's equally as important. If you have something that makes an audience say wow, which is your product and tech, getting it into the world, if you have the wow thing, do the easy stuff. Like, it's all, like, to me, go to market is all about doing the easiest thing, which is this a piece of software that actually relies on a bigger one? Well, then you got to integrate it in, and everything should be about APIs and how do you work through partners. Do I have something that I'm trying to bring millions of people onto it? Well, then you better have marketing and an easy onboarding work. It literally go to market is, don't make it complicated, make it ridiculously simple. And if you match kind of where the adoption happens, it's almost too businessy. It's just make it really simple. And that can have a couple different flavors. But it's the way to go. People get themselves way too tied up in making it more complicated than it should be.
Thanks, Scott. Linda, where do we start? I'm guessing much of your last 10 years, some of your last 10 years has been on earlier phase companies. Is that a correct observation or no?
Yeah, well, I like that you've made me younger, thank you, because it's been 27, so I'll take 10.
That was the intention. Yeah.
Thank you, exactly. Well, let me just add to what Sheng and Scott said by talking about 2 things. One is place and one is stage. And Endeavor's always been about the scale up, not the startup. So that'll get to stage second. But let me start with place, because while at Endeavor we're in 40 countries, mostly emerging markets, and then also Europe, some underserved parts of the U.S. And so while we have they're almost all tech enabled. But to your point, Scott, most of them are solving real-world problems at scale. So while we have, for example, 11 Labs, it's a Polish company, one of the 1 or 2 voice over AI companies in the world, right? So there's pure innovation. But more of what Endeavor's companies do is say, what can I do in my country? For example, the largest company in our portfolio, which is the highest value company in all of Latin America now, is Mercado Libre. And what Mercado Libre did, these were Stanford grads who came in and said, we're going to take eBay and bring it to Latin America. Then they ended up becoming Amazon, then Alibaba, then PayPal, right? And no one can compete with them because they know the market. So for example, when they were starting eBay, they realized that in the United States, people would actually ship things via FedEx or UPS. Whereas in Latin America, no one trusted one another. So they would meet in cafes with the cashier's check and with what they were selling in order to trust the other person. When you have many times now in Africa, we're seeing a lot of fintech companies that are layered onto M-Pesa, which started on mobile phones. So you've got to take each country with, in one of our largest companies in the Middle East, Careem, which sold to Uber for $3 billion. But Careem realized that in Saudi Arabia, one thing to train, they trained female drivers, which was interesting, and two, it was cash on delivery. So no one had credit cards 6 or 7 years ago. So they had to adopt it. When they realized is they were a credit rating agency for cab drivers who were walking around with the cash. So Uber couldn't figure this out. So that's what I mean for place. And what I've been saying for a long time is that forget B2B and B2C, it's E to E, it's emerging market to emerging market. So I was in Nairobi last week, and there was a fintech company from Brazil that's probably going to IPO in the next year going to Africa because he said, we make complex situations easier. So we're seeing this cross-border innovation. And the last thing I'll say on stage is for us, the difference between a startup and a scale-up is that at the scale-up phase, so we often see companies will work locally with companies at the startup phase, but they become endeavor entrepreneurs globally when they reach about 5 to 10 million in revenue and can have path into 100 million ARR. And at that point, it's not about the product so much as it's not about scaling the product, it's about scaling yourself and your leadership team. So much of what we do is helping people change their own leadership styles, change the culture, hire new people, fire the people that they bring in who are too corporate, right? How do you scale from a $10 million to a $100 million company is very different skill set. And I think that seems soft early on, and yet more than finance, more than product, I don't know if you guys agree, that's what we find is the difference in terms of which companies scale.
Very cool. So we're like, the number of mental models we've already discussed has grown, and thanks, Linda. Linda, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to get to NAMI. Sorry, I didn't realize you were operating at that level of scale. Yes, 11 Labs is a very, very good product. Sadly, we're not investors, but we can talk about it later. Yeah, very, very. I mean, yeah, Suno 11 Labs are marvelous companies. We love the audio foundation model space. I'm going to do a reboot about the culture part. So I was in India a couple of weeks ago. I have 6 investments there. And my GP and my our senior partners were there. So we met with a lot of the senior people who run most of India, and we met early founders and engineers from a couple of very large companies. One is called Flipkart, and one is called InMobi. And I found a strange coincidence there that the heads of engineering from the first 2 years, by the 5th and 7th year, became heads of HR. So that was really, really interesting. I mean, they had studied Palantir and Google really deeply about how those two companies scaled. Palantir is very secretive. I mean, our founder, Joe, founded Palantir out of his Stanford dorm. So I do know a lot of anecdotes of how the engineering team was built and scaled. I'm just curious, Linda, we forget that human structural innovation is actually a very important part of scaling in terms of, org structure, culture, networks that you build inside, who are the cultural ambassadors, and how the early cultural ambassadors set processes in play about prioritization, about taking responsibility. If you look at Amazon, I mean, the customer focus is almost to the level of like a disease, right? To the extent that Amazon, Jeff would not allow innovation to happen, really, in a vacuum, unless it was driven by clear and present customer needs. Curious in the scaling companies that you have been associated with, any anecdotes around cultural
100%.
innovation?
And Endeavor, we also have, in addition to the fund and the nonprofit, we have a research team, and we've done a lot of research into ecosystem building. And the number one thing that we've traced is the multiplier effect. And so actually the number one thing is not within companies, it's what's happening founder to funder. It's what's happening with the next generation. And we talk about creating mafias. And this didn't go over so well in Italy. But anyway, we talk about creating mafias a la the PayPal mafia. And Reid Hoffman's on my board, a longtime friend, the chairman of our fund. And what's interesting is, if you look, for example, at Latin America, so many of the founders that are having velocity of scale much sooner started out at Rappi, at Nubank, at Mercado Libre, at some of these early funds. There are 100 companies that coming out of the Middle East that started at Careem. We're now seeing companies in Africa that have come out of the early ag tech and fintech companies and now in in Southeast Asia out of the first e-commerce companies. And what's interesting is when I talked to Binny Bansal, the founder of Flipkart, and said, why did it take so long for India to get going? And what he said was that the first group of founders, the Wipro, the Tata, the Infosys, they did other things for the country, like the ID cards, but they did not pour back into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so one of the things we're really doing is saying, if you look at Google, if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, people, if they fail, they get their next check. If they're not told to, just go hide. If they leave a company, they're not told, oh, you have an NDA, you have a non-compete. That was Route 128, which died, right? Silicon Valley is about saying, I'll invest in your next innovation. So I often go around the world saying, do you want to become Route 128 or Silicon Valley? And people ask me, what's Route 128? I'm like, exactly.
Yeah, Tracy Kidder wrote an amazing book called The Soul of a New Machine about a company called Data General, which was from Route 128.
Totally.
And it was one of the books I would give to my direct staff, anybody who reported to me.
Yeah.
That was one of the compulsory reading books. But anyhow, Nami, I've come to you very late in the game, but apologize. Do you want to, you have started in the incubator. You were doing your PhD, you were doing a bunch of the 0 to 1 incubation stuff here, changing culture internally. Then you went to the investment side, and then you moved to the operator side. Any anecdotes around commonalities or differences in how you saw an entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is about innovation, but also innovation about goals, happen here, right? I think under Jeff and others' leadership, I felt like Yale has been going through that on the engineering and CS side. I think med school has been happening for a while. Any thoughts on innovation around goal-oriented culture? I know I told you last night I'm going to go off script. So, any thoughts on how you saw culture changing here and like innovation coming in through the door? And then when you go to the go-to-market side and sales side, any anecdotes on commonalities and differences?
Thank you for that question, BG, and I'll build on a lot of the great points that Sheng, Linda, and Scott have seeded here. I'll start with this observation that, startups are by default hard. You don't get extra points for making it harder than it already is. And part of the ethos of, over the 10 years of watching both in academic settings as well as in VC settings and now at a startup, the one common thread that I see is entrepreneurs, salespeople, you name it, typically tend to make this mistake of talking about their product and their features and not realizing that most people don't care. They don't care what widget you make, how you make it, why it's interesting, whether there's AI in it. They really, really don't care. They care about what problem you solve for them and how do you solve it. So getting to that wow moment that you mentioned, Scott, that's all they care about. So if you're talking to an investor, if you're talking to a customer, your priority should be, how do I get them there fastest? And that's not by telling them it's a graph database model and this is built on the newest research papers. All of that comes later. You need to get them to, I help you solve this problem, I help you save money, I help you save time, maybe all of those things, and how do you get there the fastest? And I've seen that play over and over again, and that trajectory that you mentioned, now leading sales, that's what I tell myself, that's what I tell my teammates, hey, what is this customer? It has to be customized to every prospect and every customer we're meeting. You can't have a canned script that you're just churning. You have to understand who you're talking to and who you're sitting in front of better than they understand themselves. That's it. If you, to your comment about product market fit, how do they pull it literally out of your hands? You want to get there the fastest in order to scale. So I would say that's the common throughput. In terms of culture and goal-orientedness, I remember moving from Yale to Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech had so many different programs that were all about different types of entrepreneurship, and navigating that type of campus and navigating that ecosystem was insanely difficult. You didn't know where to start, and that created this paralysis of choice. And I think when one of the mental models I took with me from Yale was there was a one-stop shop. It was the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute back then, but now it's become Yale Ventures, and there's a banner that everybody can gather around, and no matter what stage of an entrepreneur you are, you know where you can start here at Yale. And I think that there's something magical about being able to point in one direction and say, go there. Go meet this team, and they will sort you out and figure out what resources and how best to move you forward. And I think that consolidating that and building that infrastructure is what is going to make it even more stronger to scale the activity and also the successes that are generated here. And to reinforce the point, Linda, that you made, bring back those types of leaders, those types of ideas into the ecosystem. That's what we're trying to do here.
I'm going to go off script again, and I'll just give you a heads up. A topic that is very dear to my heart and Jeff's heart is being a change agent. So hold that thought. We're going to talk about being a change agent. I think that's a massive part of however you define innovation, change inside and outside. And man, but before we do that, let's take one question so we can break up the rhythm. Otherwise, I'm going to put you on the spot, Jeff, and you'll ask the question. Any one or two questions? And if you can just tell us your name. Yes, please.
My name is Ajay Shrestha. My question is, for a company to go from from 1 to 10, what kind of organization is it? Is market focused or functional oriented companies more suited to make that scale?
It's hard to answer that generally, but Linda, Scott, who wants to take it? Quick.
Me. All right. I mean, it's 1 to 10. People are millions of revenue. Probably doesn't matter, but I'll give you both. I mean, if it's people, good Lord, build the what and have one person getting it into the world, is my observational reaction. And, if it's getting to 10 million of revenue in the same manner, it's probably not that different. And I guess the best advice is you're either building it or you're getting into the world and nothing else matters. So what that means for the traditional organization functions is don't have functions have one awesome person who literally balances the books, does all the admin and everything else. Right? And maybe somebody's dual hatting any internal stuff. Don't take out all of what you consider to be admin and just you're building it or you're getting into the world. And honestly, that comment, current company that I'm sitting on is mid-size. It's got 1,000 people. Kind of looked at it in the same way, and it, freed up a whole bunch of energy and resources to do those two things because they had created, a lot of roles that were internal, and nothing good happens internally. It's all external. All external.
Shane, you want to take a brief?
I can add.
Oops, sorry, it's for Jeff.
No problem.
There you go.
So, most businesses, they have sort of a runway, start from zero and go to 10 million, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion. Eventually it kind of tapers out. I mean, if you're Microsoft or Google, it goes very far, right? And it's all kind of a matter of figuring out, to be honest to yourself, how big you think your runway is, and before you probably have to create a second product or pivot or acquire new businesses. But I'd say from 1 to 10, if you're kind of struggling to do that, there's a lot of dimensions you can optimize. You can optimize sales, you can optimize pricing, but normally at 1 to 10 kind of range, again, I'll go back to product market fit. Yeah, it is. 1 to 10, it's probably not the time to be optimizing for sales or pricing. It's probably the fit. Yeah.
Gotcha. Second question, and then we'll move back to the panel. Anybody? Quick question. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm Norma Padron, PhD 2014, Yale, an entrepreneur as well, an operator. From your perspective, what have you seen in terms of the rate at which companies scale at different stages in the last, as change in the last 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. So I think when we speak about scale, some of the mile markers have just totally moved, and then the macroeconomic conditions have also kind of upended a little bit. So it's hard to kind of understand how does scale look like before, what does scale looks like, how is that changing over time in your perspective?
I'll take this. And then I'll make a comment about Yale. But what I would say is we went from a period of zero venture capital, zero in these markets, to then the craziness of 2020 and 2021. So what I would say, which gets to both your questions, is it used to be that if you were sub $3 million, you would be going off with your PowerPoint trying to raise money from Sand Hill Road, right? And I think now the issue of getting to profitability is becoming much more central, so that then even if you choose to take venture capital, you're much more in a driver's seat because you don't need it. And you're not just spending it on marketing or whatever the venture capitalists say. You have an opinion about if you're already reaching profitability. But I would say that in terms of the timing, now's the best time to be an entrepreneur. I always say when economies turn down, entrepreneurs turn up. If you look at the Fortune 500 companies in this country, the vast majority were started during periods of downturn or recession. So I think it's sometimes when things are good, it's actually the hardest time, and now's a good time. What I would say about Yale, which echoes what Nami, you were saying, is I have been trying for so long to say, do not seed innovation, do not seed entrepreneurship, come on. And it's just so exciting. I'm here partly for the inaugural Yale Ventures meeting. I see Josh over here, and it's so phenomenal that we have him. It's Sci-City has been incredible. I see my friend Gary here, who's taught innovation and entrepreneurship at Yale Law School. So I think that it's really exciting that Yale is entering this phase in a competitive landscape. But to your point about change agents, I think also having that sense of solving real world problems at scale that Yale can do in its own way.
Can I add something real quick about what she brought up in terms of rate of scale? Like from 1 to 10 million, at least most investors would expect 3x year over year. 10 million and above, at least they would expect 2x. Now, many companies actually exceed that. Many companies don't come close to that, but that would be sort of the rough.
I guess scale and profitability is not the same.
I would say top line scaling.
All right. Well, thank you for the questions. We'll get to you. Hold that thought. So, I'm now looking at my career and life now with Yale, and having spent a lot of time and shaken the tree. I mean, initially, I think 2016 is when Jim Boyle and Cindy would be sympathetic when I would come and say, hey, how do we build stronger ties with Silicon Valley? But now things are scaling, thanks to Josh and Jeff. In my career, I was accidentally, now I realize, my last 4 roles were like change agent roles. So, at Yahoo, don't know why, you have to be a little bit crazy. I had to take over a company we bought called Right Media, which was, very large acquisition. It was a very large ad exchange. Somebody crazy had to go run it. I had to go fire, whatever. 70 engineers in 2 weeks or something, and rebuild a team. So it was a pretty crazy place. And then LinkedIn, a bunch of us, just 4 of us, including, Reed hired 5 of us out of Yahoo to rebuild all of LinkedIn. So, I was the founding head of data infrastructure.
Then eventually Jeff came out of Yahoo.
Jeff hired 4 of us. Yeah, that's right. So 5 of us went from Yahoo. And that was a big change agent role. And I'm looking back, I feel like I've mostly failed. And then I went and ran a company called NerdWallet, which we took IPO. And I still feel that failed. And now hopefully this one is working, which is Yale. Surely, with the Roberts Fund. I think the bio side of Yale has already been scaling, and right from our grad school days. But we'll come to the Yale topic. But I really feel innovation, out of the box thinking, taking risks at any phase of a company is often a human-centric story. And somebody has to be, or some small group of people, whether they are chartered to do it or not, have to be change agents inside a company. I would love to hear, rather than the philosophy part, would love to hear some anecdotal stuff from you guys. You guys have gone through various kinds of deep and wide journeys. Do you want to talk about being a change agent for your own career, or something you saw in a couple of companies that would appeal to the audience and kind of give them different mental models of what being a change agent means? Or
You want to go?
yeah, go for it.
I can start. The mental model that I carry, BG, for just any company is kind of like a Lego set. Every company that you're building is a Lego set. It has, from day one, it has all of the pieces that you need to execute on: marketing, product, the go-to-market, sales functions, all of that. Now, not all of those pieces are something that you need to put together to lay the foundation, then put the next layer on top and next layer on top. But all of the pieces in the set exist from day one. And your starting team in the 0 to 1 phase is potentially taking lots of pieces of those Legos and using it for yourself. And then as you figure things out and you hire people, you have to give away those Lego pieces to others to come in and do the things you figured out while you go specialize, or you go take on other pieces of the set that nobody has touched yet. And that's the mental model I take for myself. At a very fast-growing startup, you usually come in and your role changes every 3 months in good ways. Like, you figured something out, you hire for that role, or someone internally moves into that role, you go into the next thing, you figure that thing out, you replace yourself. That's a good journey of growth. And that's what I feel like you should be looking for in terms of like change agent. That's a good yardstick almost to see if the growth is moving in the right direction. And that's what I've experienced in like good companies and good places. Like, you create repeatable models, whether it's internal facing or external, that you can build into process. Now those things break, they have to change as your company changes. You buy add-on kits and then you add to your Lego kit. But essentially that model of like having good people who know how to give away their Legos so that the team grows, that's what I think of when building a team for myself or operating within a fast-growing startup.
Let's take this.
Why don't we,
each of you go through it,
Yeah.
but let's keep it to like a minute each.
All right, well, I have an anecdote. My motto is that crazy is a compliment, and if you're not being called crazy when you're starting something new, then you're not thinking big enough. But my example is that Reid Hoffman and I were in 2011 decided that Endeavor needed to have a fund alongside the nonprofit. We started when there was no venture capital in these markets, and then all the venture guys were looking at who the Endeavor entrepreneurs were, and we wanted to be self-sustaining. So we started Endeavor Catalyst. The entrepreneurs loved it. My board did not. So in 2017, we were 5 years in, we'd had some very large exits. My board called me in and said they didn't like that I was calling ourselves a hybrid. And so the chairman of my board, Edgar Bronfman Jr., said, Linda, just come up with a new word. No one likes hybrid. They think you're changing your mission. I'm like, what are you talking about? That we have the fund. This is easy. So I said, fine. So I come back 3 months later, and I'd said, okay, this is 2017, mind you. I said, you know what? The world is moving beyond the binary. I said, what is this for-profit, non-profit binary decision? Facebook today has 72 gender options. You don't like hybrid? Okay, that Endeavor is the world's first trans profit. Hybrid is great.
So that was about innovation in language and getting under people's skin.
Yeah, you change it. You're going to be crazy. You have to, yes.
I like it. Nobody hybrid around it. Hey, a point, I guess it's advice for people running stuff, but you don't have to be in charge. It could be without authority. Back to this change agent, even what do? You got to care. Like, you got to care. Back to scaling, back to recruiting people, back to success. In the same way, you just got to give a shit. And you got to really care about two things. The first is the people you're serving. Like, what are you doing for them, and how awesome is it? My anecdote for our own products it's an A or a D. There is no B-. MVP is the most destructive word around. a minimum viable product. That's awful.
It's either an A or a D.
It's great or it stinks. You got to care externally about what you're doing, and then internally you got to care about people. And that doesn't mean that you have to make everybody happy, but you have to care. And really, the question of change agent, scaling, recruiting team, if you care at those two levels and have super high standards on both fronts, a lot of good things seem to happen, whether it's professional or personal.
Sheng.
Can I add something? Like, innovation is in any organization, I firmly believe is a top-down thing. It starts from the top leader. So some of you who are top leaders in your organization, it's really your decision. And if you're not the top leader, you got to make sure you make a determination. If you want to go with the flow, you want to maintain status quo, and your leader is also of that nature, that's a perfect fit. But if you're a misfit and the leader doesn't really want any change, you might, I've been in several of those situations. I had to exit. It was not for money. It was just a bad cultural fit, right? But ideally, if you're a misfit and your leader is Steve Jobs, then you could very well be the Johnny Ive or Tim Cook. So it all boils down to that. And sometimes you see these large organizations, they change in a subtle way. So I'll give one anecdote. Earlier on I said I started a company called Cloud.com, and we made money. We were successful on the coattails of Amazon. Amazon Web Services, especially their cloud. They're the innovator. They're the biggest cloud. Like BG said, always one of their mantras, we innovate with customers. So just with customers, it just cut through everything, right? But over the years, it started to change because I've had so many misfits, working with these misfits and troublemakers inside Amazon Web Services. And we wanted to make things happen. We're like, okay, let's just do this thing together, make Amazon even better. And you know what I got? These guys went in and wrote their 6-page memo, and then they were told by their management that they're not going to do anything because they're for customers. They're not going to do anything unless their customer asks for it. And since customer hasn't asked for this, so this obviously by nature is a no, because we're for customers. When I heard this, how I felt? I grew up in China. I literally felt, at that time, I think they still do that. My government Chinese government like to say, we're for people. And it just stops any conversation. Like, who knows what people want, right? Only the chairman knows what people want. Nobody else does. So it's basic. Again, it boils down. It was just so frustrating to me over and over again in those interactions with AWS, like the company that I hold in the highest esteem, and great ideas with shutting down because no customer is asking for it.
Yeah. So, a lot of our friends built most of AWS from our cohort. And if you look at the story of Snowflake, where Redshift created the market for a cloud warehouse, but Snowflake quietly came and ate their lunch by doing something innovative in compute versus storage. I will try to put somebody on the spot. Our classmate Rajiv Mirani is sitting there. Yeah. I know. Jeff also. So, Rajiv has had an extremely distinguished career, was CTO of Nutanix, took it through IPO. Rajiv, a couple of sentences about cultural innovation. You were one of the best hiring managers in Silicon Valley. Anything you want to throw out for people to take home? Because you guys built an amazing organization, and so many of Nutanix's top engineers came from Aster Data before that. So it was also a Silicon Valley story.
Mafias.
It was an Aster and the Nutanix mafia, and I want to say, in India, the two most active mafias now are the Freshworks mafia and the Flipkart mafia.
Yep.
They are starting companies by the scores, and we are trying to invest in as many of them. So this network effect is important. But anyway, Rajiv, you really scaled an amazing organization. Any thoughts you want people to take away?
I think a couple. One would be, I think Linda said, is that you have to find the people who care, right? The people who are there because, or Scott said that maybe. Um, these are the people who aren't there for a job, who aren't there because, hey, if this doesn't work out, I'll go find something else. What's the big deal? They're the ones who live and die by this company has to succeed. My opinion, right? Even if they're not founders, they would think that. They would think like a founder, they would think like an owner. That's the main thing. Leadership has to be that way, but even more importantly, you really want to build that culture all the way down. That's super important. The second is, and this is what I think at scale a lot of leaders fall into this trap, is people tend to hire clones of themselves. Don't do that. Be very honest about what you are good at, what you're not so good at. Find the people who help you do the things you're not good at. Partner with them.
Thanks so much, Rajiv.
Ask a question.
Yeah.
How many people are from outside the United States here?
Meaning at what point in time in their life are born?
So born. I would say the biggest change I've seen in 20 years is this gets to cultural. People used to think they would have to move to Silicon Valley or they would never get past a certain amount of scale if they stayed in their country. That is the biggest change. Now people are almost bypassing the U.S. They're going to Singapore or Saudi Arabia for capital. They're funding themselves through the mafias and it's really interesting. So I think the biggest thing that's changed psychologically is people, China and others, believe they can do innovation at scale without moving from their hometown, whether that's Atlanta or it's in Nairobi or where I was last year. That is very different from where we were 10 or 20 years ago, where the seat of innovation was Silicon Valley.
Can I just make one point, kind of off the back of, don't hire people like yourself, and it was made around, get a different set of skills, which is right. Particularly in tech, this idea of how do you then have people travel with you? It's super powerful. It's really important. But the danger of it is that people look like you, they act like you, and I get to say this as the middle-aged white guy from credentialed private equity, and I've seen it in tech where literally everybody looks like they're traveling in the same pack, and oh my God, people look indistinguishable. They look, I'm serious, it's crazy. Like they literally, it's like 10 people, and it's like they're indistinguishable. So more the flow of be attuned to the first principles of where talent lies, which is, content depth, work ethic, integrity, and I would really recommend not getting into the trap of credentialed resume, and go to the first principles, and then you're going to end up with this great mix of people of different backgrounds. It'll be pretty powerful.
Jeff Brock, two questions for you. What is one topic you want us to cover in the next 5 minutes? Second is, you and I have talked about being change agent for the last 4 years now, and we alumni sitting in Silicon Valley, hyperactive, feeling like we have something to give back. You've been a sympathetic ear. How any shareable anecdotes or insights about being a change agent on the Yale side in a massive way, including spinning out SEAS. Anything you'd like to share?
Sure. Okay. Well, first, I just want to thank this amazing group of people for this panel. This has been really tremendous. So, round of applause in advance. So, one of the university leaders I admire most is the late Robert Zimmer, who was the president of U of Chicago, was the provost when I was at Brown. He had a phrase that I really latched onto, which is that you can tell a lot about an institution by the stories it tells about itself. And I think the change agent moment for Yale Engineering, if you listen carefully, it's partly about that. So when I got here, it was always, how are we going to make engineering better? Well, Yale's great in the humanities, and we have a great law school. Our medical school is fantastic. So we need to bring in people who, are good at law, but also do engineering. So that's one version of the story, right? The other version of the story, but it lands a little flat. If you're the engineer, right, it's kind of a downer. Right? It's not what you want to hear. But there's a version that I think we have managed to grab onto, which is what is the change happening in the world? It's engineering, it's innovation. What is every part of any great university trying to do? They're trying to innovate through technology. Where are they going to get that? From engineering. So you do have a strong case to make for the value of strong engineering at an institution like this, even taking that somewhat sort of lead-footed story and turning it into something good. So I think that's what we're trying to do. I think it's working. What I'd love this panel to talk about for 5 minutes is what I think are, you mentioned the don't fall for the well-credentialed resume. When we're doing faculty recruiting, we do have two, I think, really competing goals to achieve, right? We want to bring in innovators. We want to bring in people that are going to drive the future of technology and innovation. We also need to bring in top scholars of depth and ideas. And I'm fascinated by this when you're building a new organization. Do you take the Jim Simons approach where you just get a bunch of smart people in a room and, put the cloak of secrecy around them? Or, what's the balance between bringing in these change agents themselves, people who are going to force, kind of flex out of the well-worn paths of academia and just building excellence at a university? So that's kind of the Yale Engineering as a startup organization question I'd love your thoughts on.
Who wants to go first? And thank you, Jeff.
Well, I'll get back to story. I think that I used to say when we were recruiting MBAs, I could cover everything up and just look at the activities list and I know where they were from. Because if it was leader, okay, they went to HBS. If there was finance, they went to Wharton. And then at that point, early on, the Stanford guys had been building Habitat for Humanity in Rwanda. Now it would be, worked with John Doerr and, a reverse, Google. And I think Yale has to be Yale. And I do think getting back to, we know with quantum, we know with health and life sciences, it's been a leader. I would argue solving real world problems at scale through engineering, through technology is key. But I would say number one, lean into the Yale, because I think if it's seen to just trying to be what MIT or Stanford is, I don't think it's going to do well. And I think Yale has a really important brand. The other thing is Peter Thiel was just interviewed about AI and said math people are going to have harder problems than word people. And I do think this idea of storytelling and creativity and harnessing the power of engineering and technology, but with a new way of storytelling and problem solving, these are going to be the leaders. So I'd encourage Yale to, as I said, lean into what it does best with the taking engineering to scale.
Awesome. And then in the same way of thinking about engineering and the team around it, what's the definition of success? And what are the definitions of success? Success, and then what's the definition of greatness? And try to, and that's not a template or a rubric that's filled out, but it is helpful to write that down for different profiles or the different definitions of success for certain levels, whether it's a PhD candidate, whether it's an undergrad engineering major, whether it's, an assistant dean. And what does success in that role look like 2 years, 3 years from now, where everybody would say, oh my gosh, that person killed it. And it's not a list of responsibilities, it's a set of, impactful outcomes. And, it won't be a paint by numbers checklist, but the time of defining those outcomes and then envisioning, 2 to 3 years out, what that might look like will actually really help the hiring process. Because then you can, you're going to test against that, not, is this person smart? Do I like them? Like, most of the time, the answer to those things are going to be, yeah, they are. But if there's the big outcomes, that may tell you what team you want to form.
Let me give
one thought I would add is also like understanding the incentive structure that you're bringing them into, right? Like hiring faculty members they're tenure track faculty members. They have goals, and what scale are they being graded on matters. So if you want them to be innovative, does your incentive structure give them the necessary support to actually do those types of activities? Traditionally, faculty members are graded on publications, their strength of journals and all of that, but if you want to be innovative as an organization, do you then allow for time put into commercialization activities, time into startups and advising and all of that also counting towards progress within the organization matters?
Let me. I think Nambi just preempted my point. I think I'll make 2 points. One is anecdotal that Sheng, Rajiv, and I were discussing last night that when we were fortunate to get in and do our PhDs here, CS was rated, 7 or 8? It was impossibly hard. And there was no master's program. PhD programs came with a 5-year university fellowship. There was no requirement to teach. If you taught, you got paid extra. If you stayed back in the department in the summer, you got paid double, just so you guys know. We were rich at, $900 a month, Rajiv? Something like that, man. We were rich. But it was a very high quality, small department. So CS and engineering, the inflection points of growth and change in the discipline have been startling. So I think CS is going through a very much needed expansion now, which includes having space. And I think you guys are doing a massive program here. Sheng made a very important point, which is for deep and large disciplines like CS and surely parts of engineering, the size of the village matters. If you don't have 50 faculty members covering 8-9 areas, diffusion effects, network effects don't happen. And network effects inside departments are very important. So interesting to think about, which means hiring at scale. Now I'll make Nami's point again. It would be good for us at Yale to learn on the tech side, what are the journeys Stanford, MIT, CMU, all the universities which are known as tech universities went through, where the center of gravity culture does reside on the engineering and science side. Even med school, in a way. I mean, Stanford has a world-class med school, but Yale already has a world-class med school. And one of the anecdotes a dean once told me is, Yale is a small university attached to a large med school, but please don't attribute that. But I mean, Yale med school is phenomenal. I think the incentive structure is really important. And how did Stanford, MIT, CMU, less so Caltech, surely Berkeley, go through the incentive structures around bimodal tenures? If you're doing pure theory, then it's just about publication. If you're doing applied stuff with industrial collaboration, what constitutes good enough to get tenure? I think these are hard, open problems, but I don't think Yale has to feel alone in it. I think other universities have gone through this journey and have done well. And I would say, as alumni sitting with lots of confirmation bias in Silicon Valley, I mean, we are seeing this change, hopefully, but I would say for the bright junior faculty coming in, this bimodality of tenure is probably something the university should probably double-click on. But there's heavy confirmation bias in this panel. I won't go any further. Sheng, you wanted to say something?
No, I think we're out of time, but I was just going to say something about scale. I think we need bigger scale. We have very long time frame. We don't necessarily need to hire. Just like the Yale endowment people don't have to buy NVIDIA stock today, right? They can invest in startups and wait till it grows. So we can certainly hire a lot of promising young faculty, but we need scale.
We're in -2 minutes. Claudia, do we wrap up or take one question?
I think we actually have to wrap up.
All right. Now, this was super exciting, guys.